Fèis a thula duine agus fáilte go siúl tír an Tatha. Mór an tang son I tín cólarein leine inach, ha sin lé tálaigde Iachtari I Gaelic Tatha a cúr bhog. Sé próise compártachas lé Comann an Parant Obar Pheallaidh, Fèis Thatha, tai clúiche Fèis Pitlochry agus cóirlia fiarstas Kinross, a chódach ag dúlchas Gaelic a siúrach fiarst mar farste fallasan Tatha. Ha sin taingal cúideach son Moireach bó SSE agus Bors na Gaelic. San session webinar seo, bí Iain Moireach útar an dior léveg ai an tíre gar thorst túras a ransachuig na tíre Tatha agus a dúlchas Gaelic. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Exploring the Fèis Gaelic Landscape. Many thanks for joining us online this evening. We are delighted to launch the Fèis Gaelic Memoir, which is a collaborative project in partnership with Comann and Parant Obar Pheallaidh, Fèis Thatha, Pitlochry Festival Theatre, and Perth and Kinross Council. The project will celebrate Perthshire's Gaelic heritage as part of Shades of the Tay, which is a 3-year engagement project celebrating the places, people, and stories around the Tay. We are also grateful for funding from SSE and Bors na Gaelic for making this project happen. In this webinar session, John Murray, author of Reading the Gaelic Landscape, will take us on a journey exploring the land of the Tay and its Gaelic heritage. John has worked with us in the area over the last few years, including leading guided walks exploring our Gaelic landscape in Perthshire and uncovering some of the stories it has to tell. So we thought this event would be an ideal way to set the scene for our project. Through this project, we'll gather existing stories from Perthshire's rich Gaelic heritage and work with the community to create new content telling the stories of the past, present and future of Gaelic in the area. Over the coming months, we'll be delivering a range of workshops and webinars online. And now I'm going to hand you over to Amy from Pitlochry Festival Theatre.
Hello, thank you, Eileen. It's absolutely brilliant to be here tonight, and thank you so much. There are so many people who are in attendance tonight. We have 76 participants, and we are just delighted to have you all here. Sorry we're not in person, and sorry we can't share a dram together, but we have virtual drams going on here. The Fèis Gaelic Memoir will culminate in an audio drama. We plan to work with people in the community, local children and adults, people who speak Gaelic, those who are learning and those who don't have any Gaelic, to celebrate Perthshire Gaelic heritage. The audio drama which will be stories, music, poems, songs, will be curated and sculpted by participants, professional writers, directors, actors and musicians through workshops and webinars. We will also be coming together when we can safely do so, when that will be, we're keeping our fingers crossed, to celebrate Tatha and her surrounding communities. We're so pleased to be welcoming so many people to our launch event, Exploring the Fèis Gaelic Landscape with John Moireach. I'm looking forward to a linguistic hike this evening. Please use the Q&A function, which should be at the bottom of your screen if you have any questions, and please add them as they come up. Don't feel that you need to leave the questions until the end. We'd love your questions for John, but also any questions you have about the project. If you experience any technical difficulties, please email virtualstage@pitlochryfestivaltheatre.com or put it in a private chat to me and I will keep an eye on that. Hopefully it will all be plain sailing, and I hope you've all got your slippers on and your feet up and you're ready for a good old hike. I'm now delighted to hand over to John, author and the former Director of Landscape Architecture at Edinburgh University, for tonight's adventure in the landscape.
Right.
Thank you, John.
Right. Wel, tang fôr son yn rwra cynnyl, fi mi a brin mwyeng aving Tatha, fesger, agis she orech ŵr a hacam, agis tapalat son yn cwrw. So the Tay is a big river and we can't, are we not moving? We're not moving, are we? Play. Jeanette. Right. The Tay is the largest river in Britain. So we can't do the whole lot tonight in an hour. So I've chosen to move from the source at Ben Louis on the bottom left of your screens, which means Calf Mountain. And then we're moving through Glendochart and finally arriving at Loch Tay, and then emerging, having had a detour through Lochern and Strathern and the small glen, coming out at Killin and then, Kenmore, and then on to Aberfeldy. So we pass through a number of streams and rivers before we get to the Tay. Alt Corriolui, Aving Cononish, Aving Erline, Aving Docharst, Loch Tatha, agus Moireach, Aving Tatha. So it's a complicated thing, this. The idea of a source is a bit strange as well, because it could be in Glen Shee, it could be on Ranach Moor, but people seem to understand the source of the Tay is in Alt Collier Louis, below Ben Louis, and we're looking west towards Calf Mountain. In the bottom left of your slide, I've called this Maha Tatha, and I pinched that idea from a little loch on Ranach Moor called Lochen Maha Echa, which is the source of the River Etiv. And I wonder about this idea of the Calf Mountain, Ben Louis, whether it's the name is something to do with the infant river, because the mountain doesn't look like a calf. Why should it be a calf mountain as opposed to any other in the area? There are a number of other animal names on this slide. Bain Os, just below Alt Corriolui, is Elk Mountain, which must be a very old name because elks went extinct a long time ago. And on the right, above Bainachurn, we have one referring to a wolf's lair, Corrion the Survey. So we've got a whole cluster of animal names associated with natural features. And then where the slide becomes green, we've got Craig Vochken, so the rock of the roebucks. And at the bottom, there's a loch called Lochen them Arn, which I'll refer to later. It's just to show you where we are. Broadly, we're in another area which has never been defined politically, Bredalben, or Bryat Alban, which means the uplands of Scotland. And And William Gillis, who we'll talk about later, wrote this book in the 1930s, which has proved invaluable for me over the years, and reissued recently. On the cover, you'll see the crozier of St. Fillan, who's associated with Glendockhart, which we'll look at later. That's a 14th century silver cover, underneath which is a brass 9th century one before we get to the wood of the original crozier. Right. Now, Tyndrum, Ty and Droma, it's the house on the ridge. And to its west, there's a Clachan Droma. And westward of that, everything falls into the Atlantic. So we really are at a watershed here. And to the east, everything's falling into the Tay through Strathfillan, or Sraw, Nasraw as it's known in Perthshire Gaelic. And you can see Lochan an Arm, the bottom left ringed site. And this is where Robert the Bruce had a fight with the MacDougalls. He'd been taking refuge in the monastery at St. Fillan's Church at the time. There are a number of other names associated with that fight. Dalry is the meadow of the king, which was a major site of the conflict. And ATH, that means a ford, Connacher. Connacher was Bruce's piper. The area is interesting because of St. Fillan as well. We've got the Holy Pool and Linia Neuve, or Linia Erline, and you can see a sketch of that pool. And that was famed as a cure for insanity. And there were separate parts of the pool for both men and women. And you had to dive into the pool and fetch up 9 stones. You had to place them on this hillock, which is called Mod An Dùbhlachd. And you had then to be carried to St. Fillan's Church, where you were tied up and put on a special stone. And if your bonds were loose by the morning, the cure had worked. So there's a lot going on here. The Mod An Dùbhlachd is interesting. It's actually a Bronze Age stone circle, as you'll see, but it's been used as a site of a baronial court. And mod is the word now we use for the An Gaelic's music festival. But the outcome of justice, if it went badly for you, would be at Town na Croicha, which is the hangman's hillock. So there's incredible richness here in terms of place names. So we'll move down Nasraw, and that's a close-up of Lochan an Arm. And we can date this place name to 1306. So the legend has it that Bruce and his men, in their hurry to get away, threw all their heavy swords and armour into that loch to make their escape as fast as possible. And it's a magical secret place perched in this series of moraines. And you can't actually see it from anywhere else once you're at it. A good place to hide. And here we have the Manachan Erline, and Avanachan is what Bewley is called because it has a monastery there as well. And this, Bruce was so grateful for the shelter he'd received and the hospitality of the monks, he endowed it generously, and the relic of St. Fillan was carried into battle at Bannockburn. So it's been a really important place historically. Now we're moving down Glendockhart. Bottom left, you can see Stob and Tuya. So Stob is a stump-like mountain, and this Antuya bit is of the seat, and the seat is St. Fillan's seat, Suya Erline, which isn't on the map. You have to hunt for it. What's interesting about this slide is it shows you how corrupted a lot of the place names become when they're on the valley floor. And you can see Led Chari is Lehetja Chari, for example. Ard Cholia is Ard Chail. Ochline is Achachlonia. But when you go into the hills, the naming is much more consistent with Gaelic properly. So So yeah, we can translate some of these. So Bo Uachka is the upper hut, Bo Miawan is the middle hut. Leich, something's missing with that place name because it comes from the Gaelic for a slab. Lech, so something's missing from that. Lehechachari, it will come to later, is the slope of the pillar rock. Ish Iain is Ewan's meadow, and Tyan Luib is the house of the Bend, which is now a hotel. And I've got a great interest in collecting shealing names, and sometimes they're in places which don't accord with the normal image of a shealing as being a happy springtime full of young people flirting and courting and a whole atmosphere of freshness in the landscape. Corriolovi actually means the rotten or rotting corrie. Next to it is Mialna Sauna, and you'll probably be familiar with the word saving. This is Halloween, so it's in the genitive up there, Mialna Sauna, the hill of Halloween. And whether people went up there like they do up Calton Hill in Edinburgh and lit fires, I don't know, who knows. So we're in Clowndochart, the evil scourer. Interesting that the Tay itself means the silent one. And when you think about the Tay as a river, it is quite silent. There aren't really any rapid bits of water where you see white foam. There's a bit just downstream of Aberfeldy, but not much more. And here we have a close-up of St. Fillan's seat. So this is where the saint would meditate or preach from. And it's now was a MacNab burial ground. And the MacNabs are a local clan, and it literally means Mach an Abba, so the son of the abbot. So whether the MacNabs were descended from St. Fillan or another saint, we don't know. You'll find other seats, remember two on the island of Bute. There's a Suya Catan's seat and Suya Vlaham, St. Blaine's seat. So this was quite a common thing for the Celtic saints to do, to sort of name a place they would sit and meditate from. And the hill in the background is Skia Chraun. Skia is a wing. So it's quite an unusual element to find in a place name. Right, and now I'm quite interested in finding the truth of names. It's always exciting when you go to a site, you look at the map and you find Lehet Shachadi, the slope of the pillar rock. Sure enough, there's a slope, and this is the pillar rock right in the foreground. So that's really exciting. So we'll see a few other examples of that as we go along. Achat Lania is the most fertile field in Clowndochart. Above that is the hillock of the pine marten. No pine martens there now, but I've seen red squirrels. Right, now just to keep a grip of where we are, we're almost coming to Killeen or Killin, and after that we'll take a westward diversion and go up Glen Wauchie. But Killeen was a really important place for Gaelic at one time, because Seamus Stewart, a minister there, was the first translator of the New Testament into Gaelic. I'll just read his memorial, which is outside the Killin Hotel in the village itself. And Coinne an Diaga Uramach Seamus Stewart, Minister Killeen, Rega Hiag agus Daichet Bliana, Shach Kiet Diag, Trichet sa Shach, agus Shach Kiet Diag, Ochget Sanui. Ket et a henga and chimney nuai Gugalit Albanich, Hookach and Carrickshaw le Comann Gaelic Fjarst, agus le Carchanele, dam veil enun sa curve. Rukach an the Shach Kiet Diag, Churchle an the Shach Kiet Diag, Ochget Sanui. So numbers a bit hard in Gaelic, as you probably realise. So he was really important in making the Bible accessible to Gaelic speakers. Not only that, his son, John Stuart, went on to translate the Old Testament into Gaelic. And in addition to that, he wrote down the songs of Duncan Mcintyre, who was non-literate and had composed all these songs in his head. So these two Perthshire Gaelic speakers, and they were from Perthshire, were really important historically for Gaelic. We often think of Perthshire as being somewhat as a backwater for Gaelic these days, but at that time it was really part of the heartland. John Stuart also went on to accompany Thomas Pennant on his tour in the late 18th century around Scotland, which predated Johnson and Boswell's one. Good. So do have a look at that if you're in Killin. Which brings us neatly on to Glenlochy and the site of one of two of Duncan Mcintyre's songs. So John Stuart later became minister at Luss, and his father James was born in Glenfinlas in the Trossachs, which were at that time in Perthshire. Right, now we'll see a few things of interest here. This was a royal hunting forest, the forest of Mamlorn, and there are two names which are interesting here. Right in the centre, Loop Mabantiarna, and that means the bend, the river bend, as you can see, of the noblewoman. So that clearly indicates this was a royal hunting forest. And then on the left, we have Alaric Vikvatti. So Vikvatti is just the Gaelic for Watson. And it's thought that he was a monk who travelled from the west through Glen Orchy and then into Glenlochy, and had a pass named after him. And the story is he was murdered by the Picts, who were heathen at the time. So the song we're going to talk about is Corriacheach, which is the Misty Corrie, and it's sandwiched between Sal Gu, the black heel, and Sron and Iain, the nose or promontory of the birds. So you can see in those two names, Gaelic's using human anatomy to define landscape. Right, and here we have one from the ground. Donnacha Ban, or Duncan Mcintyre, was a gamekeeper working for the Breadalbane Campbells, who were based at the castle of Bealach, or Kenmore, or Taymouth as it is now. And he stayed at a place called Parant Obar, not in this cottage we can see very visibly, which is a 19th century shepherd's cottage, but probably in amongst this rickle of stains in the foreground. And we're looking towards Corriacheach here in this slide. Callum's Mountain is on the left. In the foreground of this slide, you can see shealing huts, quite a few of them, quite a cluster. And Corriacheach is just to the right of Sal Gu. And I'll give you a wee bit of a taste of the song. This was very much a paradise for Donnacha Mcintyre, the son of the joiner, the fair-haired Duncan of son of the joiner. And he celebrates it at some length in this song, which was sung. It was sung. So I'll read it in Gaelic so you get the sound of it. She corria a cheich nan Iain shúlach an corria rúnach as ura faun. She corria a cheich an Tatha prísio sa mácha riel mun beach a shellach. Is líonva cruasach go bhamun córsúch ri aun an buanach gu luanach clown vi channel guamach gu feral swerka sa rán gu huasel na uria town. Right, but he made the mistake of going back. We've all done that, I think. Done the same holiday twice and usually been disappointed. He's no longer working there. There's a new keeper who's related to the laird, and the place has been turned over to sheep. And what Duncan seems to be describing is the results of overgrazing and pollution, although you wouldn't have understood it in those terms. So istulich lum an carach her cordia godem anasich ha ushka strana jika na chrulich dug and shielig le barakuania liglish guvi vlasta grot. So that word grot gives us the English grotty, in fact. It just means something that's rotten. So he was very upset about the state of things that had arisen through this change in land use. His paradise had been destroyed, and not for the last time either. Right, so we're going now to return to Kirlin and take a diversion down Glan Ochel, or Glen Ogle, as it's on the map, which may be the same word from which we get the Ochel Hills, and it may be the same word whence Aileen gets her surname as well. And it's thought to be Pictish, meaning some kind of high plateau. And we'll go down Glen Ochel to Loch Erne or Loch Eria and look at a number of place names there. So we're leaving the Tay catchment, well, the Tay direct Tay route itself and going into Strathern. And of course the Erne joins the Tay. Right, so Glan Ochel. Loch Eria or Loch Erne is supposed to be named because of the number of Scots which settled in this area, and it became literally the Irish Loch. On the extreme left, we've got another interesting river name, and it's the Awing Ballavik, which literally means the river of the dumb one. And I know this river quite well because I fished it, and it's very slow moving and completely silent. And it would just over the catchment, another catchment. So the Ballavik flows into the Forth. And we're going to look at several place names. You'll see that the new post-1974 county boundary, which goes in a straight line across Loch Erne, and then it's like a boundary you'll find in the Midwest United States. Doesn't make any sense geographically. Okay, we'll look at these in turn. So these are quite unusual names. We're looking down on Glan Ochel or Glen Ogle at two landslips, which are called Scorach Nuach and Scorach Shen. And Scorach just means a rocky or craggy place. And the line which is wooded below the two Scorachs is the line of what was the Callander Oban Railway, which was the first railway into the West Highlands. And it was extremely expensive to construct because it had to go through what some people call Scotland's Khyber Pass, and was continually threatened by these landslips. And in fact, the year before it closed permanently, it was closed temporarily because of a landslip. And I wonder if it was Scorach Nuach that did it. Possibly not, because it was 1965. But anyway, we have Gaelic naming something a dynamic phenomena in the landscape, and pairing them, which is quite a habitual thing you'll find in Gaelic, the pairing of names. And in the background, we have a rock named after a thief called Macranach, but not much is known about him. Now, we're moving to the south side of the loch, and you can see Ben Vorlich or Bain Vorlich in the background, so named after a small bay on the bag-shaped bay on the south bank of Loch Erne. So it should really be Bain Vorlich. And it's a really violent story which we have to relate to explain the name of Wachan the Mra, Loch of the Woman. Mra is the genitive of ben. Ben is probably the most irregular verb in Gaelic. So ben is the nominative. You talk about your wife being Moven. Right. The woman in question was married to the Stewart of Ardvorlich, who were the local clan hereabouts, and she was the daughter of the Drummond keeper of the forest of Glen Artney. And it was another royal hunting forest, and he had caught MacGregor's poaching the royal deer. And this was the late 16th century, I think. And as a punishment, he cut their ears off. And the MacGregors weren't best pleased with that and sought revenge. And they got Drummond and beheaded him. And on their way back, they passed Ardvorlich and visited the house and sought hospitality. And the lady of the house, Lady Stewart, was away getting food, more food, and she came back and found her father's head on the table. At which point she escaped and ran into the hills. She was pregnant at the time and secreted herself for many months at this loch, which is quite remote, quite hard to get to, quite hidden. She escaped the MacGregors, but she gave birth up there, and she and her baby survived on milk she got from cows grazing locally, and her whereabouts was only discovered by local women who realized their cows weren't giving as much milk as possible. The son of Ardvorlich later went on to fight with Montrose, and he killed any MacGregor he found on site, so the story tells us. So Lochan na Mra, a really violent story associated with this otherwise magical spot. Right. Now we've seen sheilings, and shealing culture was really important. And this big rock is another one of these places which is really satisfying to find after you find it on the map, because it's mentioned in property charters from the 16th and 17th century. And you were legally entitled to shealing rights, and you were legally compelled to use them. And there were certain rules in certain areas about not bringing goats with you, or not trespassing in certain areas with your stock. So in the background, we see Ben Lors or Ben Lawa, the Speaking Mountain, which we'll come to later, and Craig Hu is in the foreground. So you'll see this phenomenon you might be familiar with in Gaelic, and which might be an obstacle to you. Du is normally black, but because Craig is feminine, the adjective becomes feminine in agreement, and you get an H after the D, so du becomes the Hu. So that can be difficult for English speakers to get their heads around, because obviously we have no genders by and large in English, and therefore no adjectives changing in agreement. Okay, now more interesting names here. Two local clans, the MacNeishes, this was their island fortress, Eilean Nuash, and Nuash was the name of Deirdre of the Sorrows' lover. We have the MacLarens celebrated here, and I don't think MacLaren himself had the big nose, the Srawn Vor. It's just Srawn is used in the sense of a promontory, and it's sticking out from a bigger hill, which is Bain Fua, the Spectre Mountain. And on the right, we have a fort, Dún Dunya. There's nothing archaeological on the top. The name just refers to hills which look like forts, look as though they have a fortification on them. And I think it's called the Fort of the One Man because it's so small, because you couldn't get any more, any other people on it. There's a legend about the MacNeishes in conflict with the MacNabs as well, The niches accosted and robbed a party of MacNabs on their way back from Crieff by the side of Lough Erne, and robbed them and I think harmed them. And the MacNabs sought revenge and came over the hills from Loch Tay and put their boat on the loch and massacred the MacNishes in their castle, having taken them by surprise. And the story was, until the 19th century, you could see the remains of the boat, which they'd left behind on their way back on the hills between Loch Erne and Loch Tay. Right, now we come to another St. Fillan's seat, Dun Erline or Dun Durn. Throughout the Highlands, you often think, how could Saint Donnan, how could Donnan have been in so many places all over the Highlands? How could he have founded so many monasteries and churches? Well, the answer is there was more than one Donnan, and there was more than one Pheallaidh, and this is a different one. So he had his seat up there. The alternative name, which you'll find on the map, is Dun Durn, and there is a fort up there, which is mentioned in the Annals of Ulster as being a big site of a battle between the Scots and the Picts. And Durn comes from the Gaelic for a fist, Dorn. And I think it's because this rock, this feature, looks like a fist. And in the background, you can see two instances of this word biren, which means anything pointed, a pointed stick, anything pointy. And these are really pointy mountains. And biren bake. Bake is little. The word to the left of Dun, the name to the left is Bealach and Tagarst. So Sagarst is a priest. So this must be a pre-Reformation name. And it's maybe connected with the other St. Fillan as well. Right, now we're going to take a bit of a leap past Crieff, and we're going to go up the small glen, or that's spelled right, and Curl Glen, the narrow glen in Gaelic. And we are on General Wade's military road, and in the course of road construction, this stone, Ossian's Rock, had to be moved. And the local people believed Finn McCool's father was buried underneath. And sure enough, when the rock was moved, there were human remains found underneath. The local people were really upset and carried them away to the sound of the pipes and reinterred them somewhere in Glen Amond or Glen Arming at a spot unknown to us, with great ceremony, apparently. And this is all recorded by one of General Wade's officers, Captain Burt, in the 1720s. So Finn McCool and the stories which his son Ossian or Ossian wrote down were really important to people in those days. And in the background, we can see a very common name in Perthshire, because Perthshire's a much smoother landscape than further west. So it's the fat rounded hill, Rawer or Rever, depending on your dialect. So we've come up Glen Quaich or Glen Cuach. So Cuach just gives us the Scots word quaich, you know, the two-handled ceremonial cup people drink out of at Burn suppers, comes from Cuach, which is Gaelic for cup as well. And I put this 1863 map up for the reason that names can change depending on the map version you're looking at. So on the extreme left, we have another Keeleen. It's the farmship of Keeleen. And Keeleen could mean the Holy Church, it could mean the White Church, or it could be Finn McCool's church. Take your pick. Also, we have a stream called the Stream of the Biting Dog, Alt Coo and Chamey. And west of that, we see Scots creeping in, west of Turrarich, east of Turrarich. And so things are changing here. You can see that. Loch Fruchi or Loch Fruchi is the same word which gives you Fruchi in Fife. We have another anglicised name, Craig Hoolich, and I'll go on to speak about that later. So these names have changed in the current Ordnance Survey maps, I think partly to reflect the landscape changing. I missed one out, Croft of the Weaving, Croch na Fiach. So that must have been operative. People must have been living there in 1863, because this landscape was by and large cleared in the 1830s by the Breadalbane Campbells. Now, this name Turrarich we can see on the map, I spent ages trying to work out what it meant, and I eventually found it in the biggest and most comprehensive dictionary of Gaelic called by Dwelly, Edward Dwelly. And he mysteriously says Turrarich, meaning warbling or purling, and says as used by Alistair MacDonald, the poet, Alistair MacVeitchte Alistair. So I eventually hunted down the poem, and it's Song to Summer or an Antauri. So I'll just read this because it's all about sounds. And I think the use of it in this landscape must refer to that purling burn at Turrarich. So shoot an Turrarich glan loniol ispinia colliec town, shiat riburus shev keitich an an fesca cune keitchen. And he's referring to grouse here, not cockerels, because he goes on to describe their habits. So it's a beautiful poem. Right, now we're going to look at the contemporary map, and some things are here, some things aren't. You see, we've lost the Burn of the Biting Dog, we've lost the settlement of Balchilleen, but there's Altchilleen is still there. But we should explain some other names while we're here. We're in the geographical centre of Scotland, allegedly, at Aberfeldy. So Mulrua was another Columban period saint like Ferlin, who had his cell or chapel or seat at Aberfeldy. So if you remember, is that word meaning a ford, and he's fording the River Bran, the Aving Freelan. And interestingly, we have a glen which is called Glen Fender in anglicised Gaelic, but it's Glaun Fiún Dóthair. And this word Fiún we've come across in Killin, and it can mean white, it can mean holy. And Dóthair is a pre-Gaelic word meaning a stream, which gives us Baindorn in Glenorchy, but also Dover in Kent. So it's pre-Gaelic and once was used all over the British Isles, but not in contemporary Gaelic. And there's another Glen Fender just off Glen Tilt, and again a religious establishment, the chapel, the Church of Lude, next to it. So I think it's the Glen of the Holy Stream. And while we're on this slide, again, in the spirit of collecting names for awful shillings, we have one up at the top, Coria Nahari Gruamich. So it's the Corrie of the Grim Shilling. So one day I shall go there and find out what's so grim about it. Right. This is the cross-incised rock, which is really hard to find. But from this point, it's got really good views down Strathbran, down through the small glen, and up Glan Funda or Fender. And it's not a remarkable spot in itself, but it's highly visible. So I wonder if this is the seat of Mulrua. The Register of Ancient Monuments dates this as late medieval, but it may be still celebrating the spot. And we know his first church was on the burn of Glenfender. I'll just go back actually, because on the extreme left of that slide, this was where the church was moved to, Taum and Tian. A Sheehan is a fairy hill, and very often early churches were established over pagan sites like a fairy hill. And we can see how Sheehan becomes anglicised into Scots as Wester Sheehan and Easter Sheehan there. The current church site is actually right in the centre of Mulrua, but we'll come to that later. Right, and there we have General Wade's Military Road. From the cemetery, we can see this other place name, Craig Húlich. A Coolach is another word for a boar. And we know there was a Fingalian legend of Frech told at Loch Freuchi, hence the name. And there's a hillock called the Taum Orain, from which the song or the poem might have been sung. And so if one Fingalian tale was being sung, then perhaps the lay of Dermid, which involves a boar, was also told at Vilrui, as it was in Glenshee or Glanshee, and where we have another boar-shaped mountain in the form of Bain Gullaban. And it has this long sort of snouty profile you can see in this slide. This is speculation on my part, but it's not without logic, I think. Right, and in Vilrui Cemetery, we find another stone with somebody who's relatively unknown, but is referred to as an excellent scholar of Gaelic. And it shows 1867 that Gaelic was still spoken widely in this area. So Chur a Chartin Muis, ek Balla an Carach Shaw, ek Uai Patrick Heimble, Vichfarland, Sarscola Gaelic, a Churkul, April, or in Giblin, Och Kiet Gieg, Trichet sa Shach, ek Ursh, Trichet sa Hern, Wundranik a Dreich, na Ministrach son de Junsech, dan schreef je clue do ver tuai, Bulin ve buina blianachin. I had great difficulty translating this, and Anne Patterson, who helped me, said it was pretty dodgy old Gaelic. But it's unfortunately the people who made the register of inscriptions, the Dunkeld and Aberfeldy Historical Society, didn't refer to this stone any more than saying it was in Gaelic. So I sent them the translation. So hopefully they'll put that in their leaflet when it's reprinted. Right, I show this because it's just one of these places of pure delight you find in place names. And wouldn't you want to be dancing there in a calm evening in May, Fesca, Cune, Caichin, on that beautiful round hillock. Right, now we are moving onwards, and we're looking south over the Highland fault to the lowlands and Strathern, and Loch Freuchi is on our left, and Glan Cuich or Glen Cuich runs before us. I took this because I really wanted to explore what the origin of Glen Cuich was, because I couldn't see anything obviously cup-shaped in the glen itself or the loch. And I looked at the map and found this Corrie Cuich, as it is, or in Gaelic, Coria Cui. And sure enough, if you look at it, you can see the rim of it is, and the form of it is strongly cup-shaped to my mind. And that must be the origin of the name. So it's funny, the origins get lost, but the name persists further downstream often. And that's true of the meaning of Ben-Lawrs as well. So Tang Vor son the slide of Bain na Conich from Aileen. Again, we're into the truth of names. Bain na Conich, some people say it's Bain na Conich, Kenneth's Mountain, but on the top, it's just covered in moss. And there's a rock and a cliff called Craig Gu and Chile, the dripping black rock. And I think the mossy source of the name perhaps is more likely than Kenneth's Mountain. And while we're in the area, we have some quite strange names as well. Miawl, another rounded hill, Nine Nun Enachain, the hill of brains. Why would it be called that? If you really go into this photograph, you'll find all sorts of pits and hummocks, a whole cluster of them, maybe 100, which are the size and shape of skulls. And then on the right, we have the waterfall, Es Achurni, the waterfall of weeping. So whether that's to do with the sound the fall makes or some event, I don't know, because all the original records the Ordnance Survey made in the 19th century when they were collecting names from Gaelic speakers were unfortunately lost in World War II when Southampton was bombed. So, right. Now, we're going to take a shortcut to our Talmud on Loch Tay and have a look at some names around the Shee, and then a detour, a quick hop across the loch to Bain-Lawr, a Fingalian leap to Bain-Lawr, and then we'll go on to Kenmore, and then to Obar Pheallaidh, Aberfeldy. Right, the normal story I tell here is about Finn again, standing with one foot on Búlachleu and another on Ciach na Machin, the sword strike and the breast of the maiden, and bending down to take a drink in his hands from Loch Tay. And but I was lucky enough a year ago to bump into the shepherd on his quad bike with his collie going up the glen, and we were talking about place names. He wasn't a Gaelic speaker, but when he moved here from Glen Urchi in the 50s, he said everybody was a Gaelic speaker in the 50s, everybody he worked with. And I asked him about this Búlachleu, the sword strike, and he said, well, the fairies, as the name would imply, lived at the Shee of Ardtalnig. So remember that word Sheehan? So it gives us Shee and Glen Shee. And Finn stayed on the other side of the loch, somewhere on Ben-Lawrs, and the fairies would mock and jeer at him from their fairy hill south of Ardtalnig. And Finn got so fed up with it, he struck the hill with his huge sword and made a great rend in their underground house. So that it was really satisfying to get this name, because this isn't recorded by William Gillis in famed Breadalbyn, although the other story is. So it was really nice to record that orally before it gets lost, because Joe McLaughlin, the shepherd, is probably in his 80s. So while we're here, we can see how Búlachleu has been corrupted. Somebody couldn't read the handwriting in the notebook in Southampton when they were transcribing stuff onto the map. So Búlachleu becomes Búcha a Cleu, So butcher is meaningless in this context. So it should be the chest of the sword strike. I don't know why it's a chest. I suppose it's a kind of chest shape hill maybe. We've talked about shieling. So the name in the middle, A and Imreich, it should really be A Nahimreich, because Imreich is feminine, but we'll not bother about that. That means the ford. Again, that word ford, A as in Aberfeldy, is the ford of the flitting. So people would be going up the glen to their shillings. And at the top of the slide, you'll see Miaul, another rounded hill, a Perthshire rounded hill. So an oirec is a cloudberry, these yellow sort of related to bramble type berries. Right. And this is the Búil a Chleu, and you can see it's a massive and very surprising sword strike in the hill, which Finn McCool made. So irritated he was with the mockery made of him by the mischievous fairies. Good. Now, from the she of our Talnig, we can see another she. We're looking towards Ranach, the hills about Ranach and Glen Lyon or Glawn Leavan. And we have another example of the truth of names. Cairn Merrick, which is spelt M-A-I-R-G on the map, means rusty cairn. And again, I'm grateful to Iain for this slide because you can see how rusty some of those flattish slabs on the ground are, which proves the truth of the names, which is really satisfying. But the other name I'd like you to note beside Miaul Grey, which just means the rounded hill again of the horse stud or horse herd, is Coria Fatterley. And Fatterley was a Urishk, and we'll talk about Urishks later. I might say neither the she of our Talnig or she Chalian, the fairy hill of the Caledonians, are typical of Sheans, which tend usually to be hillocks, glacial moraines in the valley bottoms. Right, and now we're just before going on to talk about Urus, we're going to hop across Fingal-like, Finn McCool-like across Loch Tay and talk about the Lady of Lors who had second sight, Anna Challuch. And she predicted a great many things, steamers on Loch Tay coming, the railways, and also the clearances. She was predicting things around the time of the late 17th century. And she came from Appin and married the local Campbell laird at Lors, which is now a ruinous village. And Lor itself, it means speaking mountain. It's not the mountain that speaks, it's the burn, Alt Lor, speaking and making a lot of noise as it goes down these step-like waterfalls towards Loch Tay. The prediction she made about the clearances was that one day the townships would be so far apart, a cockerel would not be able to hear its neighbouring cockerel crow in the morning, so far apart where this would the settlements become. So it's quite a tragic and prediction. But she also predicted the demise of the Breadalbin family who died without issue in the 1930s. It is said, I can't find these predictions in Gaelic, but it is said that this Gaelic inscription on the right of the screen was inscribed on a rock on the summit of Ben Lors, to which you can see Aileen striding purposely So spend as you get as you spend, and save for whom remember death. Coinich and Bas. That's not the first time I've seen Coinich and Bas. You also see that on the memorial to Duncan Mcintyre in Greyfriars graveyard in Edinburgh, where he's buried. Coinich and Bas. Right, now we arrived at Cialmore, the big head, and this is named after that sort of lump that sticks into the loch. And on this war memorial, we can see a lot of the local names of people still in the area. So McLarens, McGregors, Stewarts, and I think I spotted some more. Gillis, yeah. Forgotten country, Ersongia Os Duich, and you can see how Gaelic spelling has changed comparatively recently. Os is now Is or Agus in contemporary Gaelic. Now, this was the church where William Gillis preached. He was from Elan Yarman in Skye, so he was a native speaker, and he collected a lot of the stories around the loch, interpreted a lot of the place names, was in touch with William Watson, who was a professor at Edinburgh University. So he was a serious scholar. And Beshaw Tai Achria Tai Agrai. This was the house of his heart, the house of love. And again, you can see how the word Shaw, contemporary Gaelic, is now SEO. So another little obstacle for the translator. Tai is now TAIGH. But the wooden memorial celebrates somebody much less well known these days, Robert Archibald Armstrong, who produced the first Gaelic dictionary, the first ever in 1825. You think, Armstrong, that's not a Highland name, that's a border name or even an English name. His father was a schoolmaster at Cialmore, Kenmore, and his mother was Mary MacGerricher. So it's likely, I would suggest, that his mother was a Gaelic speaker. The MacGerrichers come from Loch Tayside and Glenlyon, Glownleaven. And you'll find MacGerrichers in Fortingall graveyard. This was a really important dictionary. It's a bit of a strange Gaelic on the memorial. Around Chemach, Jiverich, Vrieren, Kutramach. I had difficulty with this. He uncovered concealed important words. I think it really is saying he recorded words which otherwise would have been lost, and that's probably true. So he went on to teach in Surrey and died in Surrey at the time of his writing of the dictionary, which was promoted by the An Comann Gaelic in London, which still exists to this day. Right, and now we are closing in on our ending and almost out of Breit Alban, which broadly stretches from Tyndroma to Cialmore, doesn't really get to Strathern, doesn't really get into Athol. But lastly, we're going to talk about Urishks. And the name literally means Ushka, which gives a clue as to where they like to live. These mythical, shaggy creatures, men usually, and they used to love to dwell in damp hollows by waterfalls. And Gillis records numerous Urisks, as you can see from their origins, which I put in Gaelic. Aberfeldy, two in Aberfeldy, Isle of Loch Tay, Fortingall, Bendoran, Fiarnan, two in Fiarnan, in fact, and other places which I can't find where they are. So I think this is maybe a rhyme, a warning rhyme to children, because Urks would come into your house and steal things and eat your food and cause all sorts of mischief unbidden. So Pheallaidh is where we get, or Pheallaidh really, it's a double L. Pheallaidh is where we get Obar Pheallaidh from. So Pheallaigh's, or Pheallaigh's confluence. Obar is the same as Aber, so a Welsh or Pictish word. So Pheallaidh and Spooch is Bruni and Essen, Babi and Lochain is Bruni and Yelen, Patalan a Fjarnan, Patrick and Truish do a Farshikel, Fua, Coria, Galnan, Cas Lua, Lecher, Aulakan do is Catan Canlia is Urusk do more es Aulakan. So just a reminder to children not to get too near the abode of the Urus, or perhaps to stay away from dangerous running water, which again Aileen has captured beautifully in these photos. Right, oh yeah, I should say Mones, there must have been something more to this place name, because it literally means bun es, and the B gets elided with the of and becomes Mones, so Bunes. So it's the same word you'll find in Isla, Bunessen, where the famous whiskey is made. Bunessen, which means the foot of the waterfalls. Now, at Aberfeldy itself, next to Wade's Bridge, built in 1733, one of only 4 in Britain to be celebrated by stamps, you'll find this monument to the Black Watch, Clach Coinja Rechgagan Hui, so Black Watch Memorial. Frechgagan literally means watching, and Du is black again because they wore a black tartan and indeed a black coat at first. And the memorial celebrates the joining together of all the private companies in 1733, I think. Not actually at this spot, but near Weem, in fact. And the poster boy for the Black Watch, whose likeness was used, was Farquhar, I think I've misspelled that, Farquhar Shaw. It's such an awful anglicisation of Ferricher. It's hard to spell in English. So Ferricher Machgilia Shehanich. So Farquhar Shaw was the model for this statue. And this is one of the earliest depictions of Highland dress. He's wearing a belted plaid, the Fèileadh Mhór, the big plaid, which was one piece of material belted round your waist and gathered at the back, not the Fèileadh Bake, which is the modern one-piece kilt. Sorry, not one piece, but below the waist kilt. But on the back of, oops, still coming through the letterbox, on the back of the memorial we have a long inscription, which I won't read out to you, just the first bit, which is a common Gaelic expression. Cheer nam biawn, nam glawn, snyangaski. And that just means the land of the bens and the glens, the heroes. And the inscription goes on to celebrate the deeds of the Black Watch. But what it omits, and we'll go back, is that there was a mutiny amongst the regiment. The Black Watch had originally been recruited on the understanding they would serve only in the Highlands, but they were told that the king in London had been so impressed by the exploits of 2 who had presented themselves to him with displays of sword dancing and sword play in London, that he wanted to inspect the whole regiment in London. So they marched down to London, but by the time they got there, the king had gone off by boat to Europe to be part of another war. And they remained in London, but rumours spread that they were going to be sent to the Caribbean. And they remembered the agreement that had been made that they were not to fight or serve outside the Highlands, let alone Scotland, let alone Britain. So they decided to up sticks and move north, which they did. But they were surrounded in Northamptonshire and brought back to London and tried for mutiny, and all of them condemned to death. Fortunately, all but 3 were reprieved. All of these heroes were reprieved, apart from Ferricha Shaw and 2 others who were executed. So the monument mentions nothing of this, but of course recruitment to the Black Watch just disappeared like snow off a dike after this, and the officers took great exception to what had happened to their fellow serving men, and so they kept a portrait of Ferricha Shaw in their regimental headquarters in Perth, and thus he was used on top of this statue, which doesn't talk about any of this. Good, I think this is where we end the talk, and I hope I haven't delayed you over long. So we have covered, as I said, Bain Louis, the source, or the Bun, the Tus of the Tay, right through Glendochart or Glendochart, through Strathern, up the Small Glen, and Kilmore to Obar Pheallaidh. Thank you very much. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions. And I hope I haven't digressed and filled your head with too many bits of useless information.
Not useless at all. Totally fascinating. And I've been writing down ideas for, oh well, we need a new folk tale about that, and we need to know where that's come from. It's absolutely brilliant. One thing I'm particularly interested in is the Speaking Mountain, Ben Lawes.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit more about that? What's the burn that you referred to?
Yeah.
Sorry, tell us more.
Yeah. I mean, how can a mountain speak? Well, I suppose it might do with the wind, but certainly everybody thinks it's the burn, and it doesn't really start speaking in my experience. It starts in a corrie called Corrie nan Cat, Corrie of the Cats. It doesn't really start speaking till it descends from roughly the main road down to the village of Lawes itself. And Ben Lawes is incredibly diverse geologically. You know, you've got limestone, sandstone, schist, and all these are running in bands, and they're all eroding at different rates. And it forms a kind of staircase, and there's lots of little waterfalls all the way down from the main road down to the village itself, and it makes a huge racket, really does. So and there are also, you know, a variety of sounds. It's not just a roar. I mean, there's gurgling, there's whispering, there's shouting, there's I don't know, more conversational tones, love songs perhaps. There's weeping, but you get a lot of soundscapes recorded in place names. You've got a loch Eoch, the shouting loch in Ranach, and the Bialach Glígersneich, the tinkling pass south of Loch Earn as well. So it's yeah.
I love the idea of the landscape speaking.
Yeah,
I think that's quite a magical and a very theatrical idea as well. The idea that the narrative is there, you just got to listen. So really beautiful. For those of you who are still with us, and lots of messages have been coming in saying how interesting this has been, and I thank you so much, Don. It really has been. Questions, please, can they go into the Q&A, then they don't get lost in people saying how much fun they've had. My Gaelic is non-existent, so I apologise for my pronunciation. But a question from Steve: when did Loch Aya become commonly known as Loch Earn?
Well, another version of area would be Erin. So it may be that version has been recorded by the map makers. I don't know, really, as I say, because these name books have all got lost. You can't find out what was originally recorded. You'd have to go back into early charters, certainly. But Erin, area, I mean, they're both names for Ireland, whence the Scots came originally. So take your pick. I mean, Watson sometimes uses Loch Area and sometimes Loch Erin. So I think Erin's easier to say as well.
Yeah, I think sometimes language comes down to that, doesn't it? It's what do most people prefer? Lovely question from Drew. Are there any names in the area that refer to bears? Mathan and Mathan. As I imagine that the area would have been home to bears at one point.
Not that I found. I mean, I found bear words further north in Sutherland, certainly.
Yeah.
Gaelic's a bit fluid about animal names. Mahon literally means a good heifer, which is really strange. So words which refer to heifers, which are common, Galna, and we saw one in that Urusk poem, could refer to bears. You'll see lots of names referring to matach, meaning a dog, but they may be referring to wolves, which is a matagali, may have just been shortened. So it's difficult to know. But bears, I guess, would have become extinct sooner here than in Sutherland, I guess. 9th or 10th century, I think, something like that. So they might have gone from here much earlier.
Yeah. The last wolf, I think, was 1600s, wasn't it? Something like that.
I think slightly later.
Was it?
Yes, I think so, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, but you do get a lot of wolf names in Perthshire.
Another question from an anonymous attendee. How accurate do you think the OS surveys were?
I think pretty accurate in what they recorded. They obviously omitted a lot. They depended on 3 sources. The sources they chose maybe skewed things because they chose to speak to people of property, people of a profession like a minister. So perhaps the perception of non-literate people who didn't own anything, didn't have any job but working the land, would have been missed out. But certainly when people nowadays go about collecting names orally, particularly say in Lewis, you'll find maybe 5 times the amount of words known orally as were recorded. But you can argue about this all the time, which is quite why I like things like, if you go to the top of Carn Merk, you find it's rusty, you feel that's true. I like that aspect of finding the truth in your own experience. But the Ordnance Survey isn't going to change the names now widely. So we're stuck with this frozen record, I guess. And I guess that's all we have to use, unless we start making up new names, which is unlikely, I would think. But I think broadly, my feeling is broadly, a lot of them are correct. A lot of them, most of them are recorded in correct Gaelic. The problem becomes when they become mangled up with Scots and English. They're very hard to decipher. But I must admit, I've tended to work with this top layer of the Ordnance Survey. I know serious name scholars go right deeply into medieval charters and all that stuff.
There's a couple more here about animal names. So there's one from Ross. When we come across cat place names in the landscape, can we assume that these are always wild cats? Cat Fiaich.
I would think so. I would think so. Yeah, I mean, people have kept domestic cats, for a long, long time. They probably came with people when they settled in the British Isles. But I think the habitat of the wildcat would have been much more difficult for a domestic cat to penetrate and breed with than it is now. And they would have been much more numerous. So I would think they would be likely to be wildcats. And that's the big problem now, that because it's like the salmon, all the wild salmon have interbred with farmed salmon. Same thing's happening with wildcats.
Yeah. There's another one here from Callum McLean. There is a corrie of a gauna beside Bain a Chrechan on the north shore of Loch Lyon. Corrie of the bear?
Well, it could be the heifer again. So Ma Gauna, I mean, the Ma just might have got missed out, dropped. And we have to remember these people, their livelihoods depended on the export of cattle. They didn't eat much of it themselves. It all went for export. So the cattle names are really, really common. So I think the likelihood is it's probably a cattle name, but I don't know. You see, it's funny, this shortening of words, because we talked about this when we were in Glenshee. You know, that one word for hare is a gyar. In Irish, it's a short deer. The Scottish Gaelic has dropped the gyar ear bit. It's dropped the deer bit, so it's now known just as a short. So, you know,
that's
yeah.
great.
A few questions coming in.
A few more questions, yeah. This one I was going to save to last, but Lindsay's asked, do you have a favourite place name or story about a place name, John? Take your desert island place name.
Well, I do like Lochlan an Arm because it's old, 1306, and there is a complicated story. There's a whole sequence of place names attached to it. We know the MacDougals of Lorne still have the plaid brooch they tore from Bruce in his escape in Dunolly or Down Owleye Castle. So there's the reality there and that artifact. And but I think the favourite one would be Alt Bialach Glígersnich, the stream of the Tinkling Pass south of Loch Earn. And Glígersnich is the sound change makes in your pocket. And again, it's about the truth. If you go there, it's like being in the most incredible, you know, if you imagine somebody like Einaudi wrote for a water organ or something, you know, it's like that. It's incredible.
Thank you. Just another one then from Alan Lewis. Having visited the church at Amulree, the record seems to suggest that Glenquaich was cleared in the 1840s onwards.
Yeah.
It's comparatively late. So is there something in Perthshire that the clearances didn't hit here till later?
I don't think that's comparatively late, really. I mean, they were going on throughout the 19th century. They didn't really stop till Crofters Acts. And there was likely a drift to the lowlands anyway. People saw the writing on the wall. You know, a lot of the sheilings were being made inaccessible to people, which really meant their livelihood, depending on moving your stock to the fertile upland pastures in spring, that would be cut off from you. So, but it's interesting that name, Croch na Fiach, meant that people did persist where they had an occupation. They could produce something rather than just subsisting in the form of cloth. So I wouldn't say it's that late. I mean, certainly the tragedy for that part of Perthshire is, and also south west Loch Tayside, is that people were cleared before the Ordnance Survey came around in the 1870s to record the names. So you get these huge blanks on the map, which don't indicate a blank landscape. They just indicate a lack of people who knew the names, which is frustrating.
And really sad, and actually very indicative of how names and naming things is a really human thing to do. And if we don't have that kind of tradition carried down, kind of we feel lost in the landscape.
Yeah, I mean, those Glendochart names, which I didn't tell the story, were part of how people identified themselves by making a mind map and almost making a song out of the names. And, you know, Donnacha Ban McIntyre, Alistair McVeish, Alistair Alistair McVeish, Alistair wrote, Donnacha Ban didn't, but composing. And in order to keep themselves on track, place names crop up all the time. And also it allows people to situate themselves in the song, because a landscape they're familiar with is being referred to or being sung about. You know, everybody wants to go to the Beatles Museum, don't they? And go to Penny Lane.
Penny Lane, yeah.
Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields.
Just from Dee and Graham, no questions, but many thanks. It was fascinating. We know the area well, but you've given us lots of new perspectives. Can't wait to get back to Perthshire and visit more of the places you've highlighted. So thanks from Dee and Graham.
It's been a pleasure, yeah. And your son, too.
There's one there from Wilson. It is interesting to note the references to Ireland, Loch Eyre and the tales of Finn McCool and the Fianna warriors, for example. Did the Dalriada extend this far east?
Oh dear, that's a hard one, isn't it? Well, I mean, Finn McCool was a trans-Gaelic. I don't mean that in gender fluidity terms. I mean, his stories were current in both Ireland and Scotland, and the Lay of Fflewch is cited in Amalree, Glenquaich, but it's also cited in numerous places in Ireland as well. So it was a common culture. I think we make a mistake of thinking of nations here. There was a lot of tribes and chieftains, and Dalriada, the share of the tall king, Dalriada, he was just another tribesman, and he had 3 sons who split up Gaeldon. So Scotland really didn't, as we know it today, didn't come into existence for a long time, and neither did Ireland for that matter. And there never really was a united Ireland, really, until Ireland became independent, funnily enough. So I don't know. It's a common culture. It's a united culture. I mean, Irish and Scottish Gaelic didn't start diverging linguistically until the Reformation, really. And that bridge, that linguistic bridge, was lost. And the Protestant Church discouraged the telling of tales of Finn McCool and bathing in holy pools and believing in miracles. Not successfully, obviously. But that updating, I guess, and it was a two-way process. That updating was severed with the Reformation.
Thank you. From another anonymous attendee, how useful and reliable have you found the NLS 3D map feature, assuming that you've been using it?
The NLS Maps site.
The 3D map feature.
Oh yeah, brilliant. That's what I've been using.
Great.
I mean, it really is handy, and it's reasonable resolution. I mean, I hope everybody's getting a good resolution, because you can click a box which puts it on high res, but and you can spin them round, which you know how you get hold of a map and yours hold it north pointing upwards, which is a kind of mindset which the Australians object to. You go to Sydney Airport and you find the map of the world the other way up. But anyway, you can spin the 3D thing around. It's absolutely superb. You can zoom in to a reasonable degree. You can actually pick out that Clach Vor Nahari Lay close enough without the pixels all taking over. So yeah, it's great. Great work.
I think the other map that I have found, I discovered recently, was Past Map, the Historic Environment Scotland one, where you can
Yes.
go in and delve into the archaeological sites and things. There's two more. There's a comment and a question here, and I'm going to tie them in together. So from Irina is just saying, Murintang, this has been so interesting and informative. I look forward to the next chapter. And hopefully to my ancestors' district of Dunkeld. So just to say, when we started putting this together, we realised that we couldn't quite do the full Fèis Gaelic landscape. The Tay is huge. No. So I think we're looking at least a 4-parter, and this was the first. And John is already working on the next one, which I think is Rannoch to...
probably Rannoch to Pitlochry.
Rannoch Pitlochry, yeah.
And then
there's lots to cover. I mean, we still need to get all the way right out beyond Dundee. So we could do this all year. And the final question that's on here is from Callum McLean again, saying, thanks for the talk, John. I've heard the river was often called Ushgata. Now, Amy and I have been talking about this today, rather than Awain or Avain. Have you found that? And I know that in Perthshire Gaelic, it's referred to as Ushgata more than Awain Tatha.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. It could be. I think the Clyde is Ushka Chluai, for example. I think the fourth is Ushka as well. Yeah, I think that's probably correct.
Does it depend on the volume then of the body of water?
Who knows? Who knows? Who knows? Yeah. I mean, certainly this idea of the Tay being the silent one's interesting. I mean, the only rapids I can think of are Grantley, where people do the canoeing. Can't think of any other ones. Everything else round about is pretty noisy. The Tummel, the Dochart.
Yeah.
The Ern's pretty silent, actually. Yeah,
Yeah.
Ushka, interestingly, there's just north Callander, the Teeth is referred to as the Ushka Garaf, the rough water. So I don't know if that helps or doesn't, helps or hinders.
I think I'm gonna have a newfound learning about the landscape. I'm gonna go around and listen to the water to see what it sounds like. Brilliant.
Soundscape in the water. And then we have there from Drew McNaughton, Ushka is similar to other river names like Esk.
Yeah, I mean, the river names are interesting because they're often pre-Celtic. I mean, Tay is supposed to relate to Tain and Tamar and another Tain in Devon and Tyne. There's a Tyne in England, Tyne in Scotland. And it's supposed to relate to some ancient Indo-European goddess, supposedly. So that the oldest names we have, and clearly Ushk-esque, are related. And because that's probably the way people got into the landscape, first of all, by boat. So it's quite a good way of hanging a talk together, really, around a river, because that's how people would have first discovered the landscape, albeit we're going the other way. Perhaps we should have gone from the mouth to the source.
Well, we can't change direction now. It would be far too difficult to paddle against the tide, I think.
What we've learned, though, with starting to talk about the Fèis Gaelic Memoir is our project is developing its own tributaries, right down to the finest trickle, and going off in all directions.
Yeah.
So lots of thank yous coming in, and people saying they can't wait for the next session. So John, thank you very much. And to everyone who's been with us, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real joy. And hopefully one of the sessions at least will be in person with a wee dram. Just to say, if you have any questions, any thoughts, any anything you'd like to kind of share, if you'd like to share stories with us about areas of kind of the Tay and surrounding landscape names, whatever, please do email me. You've all received an email from me today, but my email address is amy.liptrot with 2 T's. I'm afraid I'm not the Amy Liptrot from Orkney with 1 T. I always let people down. I'm so sorry. It's such an unusual name. I do think that if we're ever in the same room, the world will stop. So we're making sure that doesn't happen. So amy.liptrot, 2 T's, at pitlochryfestivaltheatre.com. Please, to find out more, I will be sending emails out again once we've kind of got more things planned in, but there will be workshops, webinars. We're going to be looking at songwriting as well as story writing, poetry writing. So please come along and share and enjoy.
Yeah, Moireach tang a thula duine agus Siubhal.
Aye, Siubhal agus Beannacht.
Beannacht.
Tíri maha. Oh. Now, how do I?